The science of happiness can certainly help us increase levels of happiness, but can it help us better deal with failure, hardship, and even loss? The answer is yes. The science of positive psychology provides tools and techniques that can generate more happiness, as well as cultivate resilience that is critical for navigating through difficult times. Today on Happier Talk, we're going to visit the meeting place of these two seemingly separate worlds, of happiness and despair, worlds that are in fact joined together through loss and gain, whose borders melt through tears of joy and of pain. She's a clinical psychologist, a master teacher, a wise and authentic role model to me and many other teachers and psychologists. Focusing on resilience of the human spirit and life flourishing, she has helped thousands of people the world over experience personal transformation and growth through both good and bad times. She writes extensively and is the author of A Short Course in Happiness After Loss and Every Day Counts. It brings me great joy to introduce to you Dr. Maria Sirois. Welcome, Maria. So great to have you here on Happier Talk.
Oh, I am delighted to be back with you, Tal.
So, how do these two worlds meet, the world of happiness and the world of loss?
I began noticing this without really not having language for it in my early training when I was working in a pediatric oncology ward, helping children face life-threatening illnesses and helping their parents manage the vicissitudes of the disease. And noticed that some of these children, even as they were heading toward bone marrow or surgery or chemotherapy, had a kind of radiant life to them still. And some of these families were laughing and warm and generous and thoughtful about others around them. And in my head, I guess I had an assumption that in the darkest moments, we either fall apart or we shut down. And what I was witnessing on the ward over and over again is that there are other possibilities. And that began to illuminate for me this intersection between suffering and happiness. And I think it's best exemplified by an understanding that we can be broken and joyful. We can be wounded and appreciative. We can be uplifted and poignantly aware of the suffering of others. So there's these beautiful ands that when we open our eyes wide enough, we can begin to live into.
So what happens in those ands, in those merging points, for example, when suffering and gratitude coexist?
Well, what we see is that the most resilient of us can hold both at the same time. So the evidence from a positive psychology perspective is that we're looking at people who don't deny their feelings, permission to feel all that they feel, which is one of the tenets of your teachings, permission to be human and experience dark thoughts, dark feelings, worries, anxieties, and they build in other capacities. So we'll see evidence of them leading from a signature strength such as gratitude, so seeing the world through appreciative eyes. We'll see them putting aside time every day just to nourish themselves. So we'll see a devoted practice to self-care, self-love. We'll see them literally bringing in poems or quotes or songs to lift the spirit. So we see a kind of an embodied positivity through meaning and through significance and through the art. So the integration happens actually within the person's choices to move toward what is good and nourishing and strong while completely open and available to their pain.
And that increases the likelihood of healing. That certainly contributes to their overall experience during their battle with whatever it is they're battling with.
Yes, and also we know that positivity has a contagion effect. So imagine if your child is in a hospital ward and you're entering the room with this attitude of, okay, this is terrible, I don't wish this on anyone, and yet how can I bring what is the best within us and between us alive so that his or her experience is not just the wound or the pain or the diagnosis. In a sense, we become larger than that moment. Now, I've been using big examples, cancer, blood diseases, et cetera. But this is also true in the minor experiences, the disappointments of life, you failed a math test, or you didn't make the team, or someone just broke up with you. Again, the most resilient, and those of us who thrive through these ups and downs of life, are wise about, God, what can I do even in the presence of this moment? Even in the presence of this day, what can I do to lift myself and to create this positivity around this suffering?
Barbara Fredrickson, the positive psychologist, talks about the idea of broaden and build, and how when we experience a positive emotion, we broaden our perspective and are more likely to build resources for dealing with hardship as well.
Exactly.
And this is what these positive experiences do, even the small ones. They help us see beyond just the illness, or just the breakup, or just the bad math test. And they also help us build resources to better deal with the hardship.
Exactly. And the metaphor that I love to use is the metaphor of that Japanese art form from the 15th century, kintsugi or kintsukurai, where broken vessels, where artisans learn to repair them with gold lacquer. And in so doing, they retain their wholeness, their purpose, their intentionality, even though they are scarred and marked, just like we are, right? So as I'm doing, here's what's fascinating. As I am falling apart in whatever way I am, and I'm repairing the breakings with golden lacquer, the positivity moments, or positive psychology practices, or looking for the good, or etc. As I am actually lacing my day with that golden lacquer, the positivity practices and perspectives, I'm bringing together the vessel, I'm bringing together myself, but what I'm also doing at the same time, paradoxically, is becoming anew. I'm moving into a self that can hold much more of life. And that, referencing Barbara Fredrickson's positivity spiral, that broadens and builds my own understanding of the who of who I am. I'm larger than I had been before as I go through this suffering. And the world is suddenly a place that is more available to play in. Does that make sense? So I broaden and build my particular skills and capacities, but I also broaden and build my entire sense of self.
It reminds me of a quote a poem by Khalil Gibran, talking about how each time we experience suffering, not reject it, but experience suffering, it's like digging deeper inside ourselves. It's like expanding our vessel, and our capacity expands for experiencing emotions in general, also the pleasurable, the joyful ones.
Right.
And I think this is what you see with many people who fully experience pain and suffering and disappointment, while using the golden lacquer to hold it together, and they have a bigger capacity for future experiences and present ones as well.
Yeah, I mean, and the downside is you have to experience the suffering. You can't deny it.
There are no shortcuts. I was going to get to that. No?
Yeah, no.
Oh.
Yeah. No,
that's a downer, right?
That is a downer. That you have to be willing. I was just in a conference yesterday, and a woman literally raised her hand and said, "I'm nervous about all these aspects of the self because I don't really want to do emotions. I don't do emotions. I don't really want to do them." Well, the bad news about suffering is it will call forth all of you. You will be rent. You will be on your knees. You will be broken, emotionally, physically, psychologically, intellectually shattered. And in that shattering, just as you mentioned, there can be a coming together if you choose it. It's a choice. As we know, happiness is a choice. Resilience is a choice. Thriving is a choice.
Yeah, when I go through some of the positive psychology practices, people from the audience would sometimes say to me, "Tal, but if I practice this gratitude on a regular basis, and I exercise and I meditate and I do yoga and I do all these things, I'm a little bit concerned because everything will be great then. I'll be happy all the time, and then I won't learn and grow because I also talk about learning and growing from suffering."
Right.
And you know what my answer to them is? I say to them, don't worry.
Trust me.
Yes. Trust life. It will take care of it. It
That's
will. You know,
right.
those curveballs will come. They
That's right.
always do.
Remember we had that young woman in her 20s in our class who raised her hand and said, I'm learning that you really grow through the hard times, so shouldn't I go out and look for more hard times? And we were like, you know what, honey?
Don't worry.
It's on
They'll
its
look
way.
for you. Yes.
It's on its way. Right.
Yeah, and there's something very comforting in knowing that it's inevitable that we all go through it. There's nothing wrong with us when we do experience these emotions. And it's also comforting to know that we can learn and grow from them.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me, some of the myths that I try to break down in the book is the belief that when life, wounds you, that somehow you're wrong or bad or you've done something wrong. And the reality is life is as it is.
Yeah.
And we know that the one thing we actually have control over is who we are and how we shape our day, right? And so to shape the day toward practices and principles that lift you means that you've given yourself the best chance to be in the dance with life as opposed to fighting it or running away from it, because we know that those two stances just lead to depression, anxiety, isolation, a feeling of meaninglessness and insignificance, and that general kind of world weariness that unfortunately we see often in certainly in corporate America today. We see it often in our children in middle and high schools. And the beautiful news about these practices that invigorate resilience is that they also invigorate thriving. They also bring us to the place where we do have that sense of, I'm here to rock with life. And even though life sometimes is hard with me, I'm here to rock with it.
What general advice or what specific examples would you have for people who want to become more resilient, who want to rock with life?
Yes, thank you. First, feel what you feel, think what you think. If you're lonely, if you feel exiled, if you're unhappy, if you're wounded, if you're suffering, if you're grieving, feel that. Honor it, acknowledge it, feel it. Second, consider that every day you have an opportunity to recognize that while life will bring you darkness, it also every day brings wonder, beauty, awe, kindness, generosity, and begin to look for those moments. So look, even just a moment a day, put aside a moment a day to notice what is good in the day, or notice what's good in you. Third, to choose a specific practice that brings you toward your best self. So that might be the practice of living into a signature strength, a character strength that's maybe courage or hope or optimism or gratitude, etc. Or it might be the practice of journaling a few moments every day toward, if I could be 5% happier today, what might that look like? But create a specific daily practice. And the fourth piece of advice I would give anyone is to begin to gather models in the world of people who have gone through the dark territories. I look toward Nelson Mandela. I look toward Malala Yousafzai. I look toward Oprah Winfrey. I look for these models of people who've suffered and yet grown. So to find those models, read about them, dive deeply into the learning about them, and hold them up as, okay, I want to be more there. I want to be more. All of that will shape you in a positive direction. So I'll just give you a concrete example. You know how life can throw you everything at once. So
when it rains, it pours.
Pours. So a few years ago, I went through a very difficult business. My ex-husband and I went through a very difficult business loss, which caused tremendous strain in our family relations. And our marriage began to fall apart. My daughter was suffering from anxiety. My younger son was beginning to worry at night. And then in the middle of all of that, my younger brother died after a 10-week diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. So earth-shattering on every level. No solid ground underneath. After the funeral of my brother, I came back home and my marriage was falling apart. So my bedroom was sort of this quiet place of sanctuary, and I began to ask myself, well, how in God's name how do I possibly put together a life in the middle of all this that has that thrumming, dancing sense? All the studies I've been doing sort of came home right in that moment.
Became personal.
absolutely personal and so real. And so I asked myself, if my day were 5% happier, what would that look like? And even the word happier seemed ridiculous in the moment. So I changed that to, okay, 5%, like a little more better, good, like even optimism felt too big. And what popped up right away was I love to dance. My body just loves to dance. And so I began this daily practice of getting up in the morning, feeling the weight of it all, the sorrow and the, heart wrench. And I would put on my yoga pants and a sports bra and a t-shirt, and I put on MTV because they were there 6 o'clock every morning, and I would dance for 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. And that practice became so enlivening that it lasted for 13 months. And over time, I began to notice after just a few months that not only was I dancing a little bit in the morning, I began to feel that sense of being more in rhythm with this new normal, dancing with this new sort of mended vessel that I was. I began to see more good in the day. I was a little more appreciative of kindness, even though I was so mad at the world for taking my brother. I began to feel like I had something a little bit more to give my kids other than we're just going to get through this. It began to be, okay, I'm dancing. What can I help you do to feel a little more light? So I actually started engaging in those conversations with my kids. So that one small practice began to broaden and build my experience.
And I think that the very important message here is how small practices, how mini interventions can make a big difference. And the key there is the persistence, because we think, this is so overwhelming, this is almost larger than life. How can 5 minutes or 10 minutes make a difference? But it can. And it can because everything is interconnected.
Yes.
Because that 10 minutes affects the next minute, and that affects the next interaction, and so on and so on.
Yes.
It builds. So the key is choosing that activity and persisting with it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you very much for bringing happiness to my life, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us here on Happier Talk.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Happier TV. For more interviews, reflections, questions, and answers, please join us again.